So first, I wanted to say that somebody like myself doesn't work alone. And in those 25 years in 25 states, I've worked with hundreds of communities and a lot of CAFO leaders like Sandy Bean. And some of them are in our virtual audience today. So I want to do a call out to Karen Hudson from Illinois, which I believe came out here and helped fight Reba Hop early days in Ohio. Maria Payen in Delaware, who is fighting poultry industry on the Eastern Shore, and some other good people like Chris Peterson in Ohio, Diane Rosenberg of JFAN in Ohio, of course, Dr. Eichert here in the audience today, and others that are people just like yourself, woke up one day and there was a CAFO across the street, and they learned the rules, they learned the system, and they became champions of their community. Okay, I'm gonna cry thinking about it. All right, let's talk about what's going on with the bird flu. This is my third time I've given this talk, and how come it's not doing anything? You do that.
Yeah,
Oh, just click there.
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so when I first started this, it was only in six states and 20 farms. Now we're in 9 states. Colorado just joined the party this week. And I say 33 plus, we'll talk about that. The public was given information on March 25th that there was bird flu. Now, the only symptoms in the dairy cattle was reduced milk production, abnormal milk, and some abnormal manure. So you got to ask yourself, if the cow's not dead, but it's given milk, how long did it take for the dairy farmer to determine that there was a drop in milk production? Now, you guys up here have freestall barns, you've got cows with microchips in their ears, et cetera, et cetera. But let me tell you how it goes down in New Mexico and Texas. They're all out on dirt. They are low tech, no microchips. There's some guys down in a trench and some gals putting the machinery on the udders, taking it off, put the machinery on the udders, taking it off, wiping off for mastitis, putting it all day long. Whether or not they actually notice that a particular cow is producing less milk, highly unlikely. Okay, now they may recognize that the milk is abnormal looking because they have clear piping. But other than that, they're not going to know. Who's going to know? The dairy farmer owner after a while when the receipts start to go down. So how are they going to backtrack that out to a particular cow when the average size of a dairy in New Mexico is 2,000 head? All right. So interestingly enough, in the early days of this is not a problem, the USDA has said, don't worry about it. It seems to only affect less than 10% of the herd, 10% or less. I said, whoa, Nellie, 10% of 2,000 cows is 200 cows. That's a lot of cows. So when they're talking about 33 positive tests, what it is 33 herds, which means that there's no limit on how big the herd size is. And so there could be hundreds of cows that were positive. Okay, now, just want you to know that. Meanwhile, the milk was being sold. And in New Mexico and Texas, the milk goes down to Southwest Cheese, which is the largest cheese manufacturing facility in the United States. Okay, so think frozen pizza, any kind of cheese you could think of in that realm. They had no idea that they had avian influenza coming in live. One of the things I said, well, you know where, you know this, it was so interesting on the bus tour yesterday. Beeline? Beeline. Okay, so the farm in Texas is located near Amarillo, which is called the Panhandle of Texas. It's right underneath the Panhandle of Oklahoma, my home territory. So Amarillo, so the first dairy in Texas was just northwest of Amarillo. When you go continue north through Amarillo, you'll pass through the Panhandle of Oklahoma, which has 1.4 million seaboard pigs. Okay, and then you go just over the border into Kansas, and you get into Seward County, Kansas, Dodge City, and now you're in beef cattle country, where there is a beef cattle feedlot that is 1 square mile, 300,000 head. 1 square mile. I flew over it myself. It's monstrous. Okay. Interestingly enough, about 2 weeks ago, Cal-Maine egg layer, which is located just southeast of Amarillo, had to cull over 1 million birds, layers, because of highly pathogenic avian influenza. Just planting some seeds in your brain. So what is HPAI? It is a highly pathogenic avian influenza, is either subtype H5 or H7. It's a type A influenza. It will basically kill birds. High death rate. We know now the one that we're looking at is an H5. What am I doing? Right clicking. Again, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but there is a website that tracks wild bird HPAI. And of course, we all know where the migratory flow paths are. And then this map is now on the APHIS website. And it shows the states that have positive detections. So we're going to talk about 2 things when you read. There's going to be confirmed positive, and there's going to be presumed positive. CDC and USDA will only post confirmed laboratory tested positive. But some of the states are saying they presume positive because either they knew the diseased cattle went to that farm, or the animals are already exhibiting the symptoms, but the test results aren't back yet. So if you ever see any differences in numbers, that's it. But so when you look at Texas, I don't know, where's the little pointy thing? This thing right here? Right on the right. Oh, okay. So when you look at Texas, so look right here where the dot is, which is right underneath the handle of the pan of Oklahoma. That's where the Texas dairy was. The New Mexico dairy, I believe, was about right here in the middle of New Mexico. And then all of a sudden we went to Ohio, and that's because of some ownership issues, but we also went to Idaho and Kansas. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. How did we get these diseased cattle across the country? By truck, right? You're a dairy farmer, your cow's not producing much milk. You said, you know what, I'm just going to get rid of that cow because it costs the same amount to feed a fresh heifer as it does an old one. So I'm going to put it on the market for pennies on the dollar. And there's other people on the internet's dairy guys going, oh, I'll buy that cow, pennies on the dollar, put it on a truck and send it to me, like Idaho or Colorado or Kansas or whatever. That's what they do all the time. Or they take it to slaughter and it becomes ground beef. Okay, all old dairy cows become ground beef. Okay, think about that. This is a timeline. If you start in the lower right-hand corner, these are the positive test result dates. We started with March 25th, 2024. And again, I looked at that and I go, okay, it's going to take time for the milk production to go down, for the dairy farmer to get concerned, for the dairy farmer to call a vet, for the vet to do a test. They're not going to pick HPAI first thing out of the block. So it's going to take a long time before they decide to even run that test. So let's back it up to at least the beginning of March, if not February. Okay. Now look at the sequence. We have Texas, Kansas, Texas, 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 Michigan. Interestingly enough, the news articles didn't mention Michigan until like the following week. They were mentioning Kansas before Michigan. I found that very, very interesting. Then, of course, we get lots more. So now we have 11 confirmed herds in Texas. Remember, it just started with 1. New Mexico, 6, also just started with 1. Kansas, 4, obviously. Idaho has just jumped up. They've doubled. Michigan, up to 6. North Carolina is still at 1. South Dakota is still at 1. And Ohio still at 1. Okay, and I am using my air quotes for those who can't see. All right, the federal, oh, it was so funny. So at first, oh, there's nothing wrong with it. Everything's gonna be fine. The milk's fine. Don't worry about that, right? That was the first thing to come out. Industry says, we got it covered. We have biosecurity. Don't worry about it. It's not gonna go anywhere. We don't know how it's transferring around, but it's not gonna transfer. Okay. And then I read an article and it says, well, the federal government's just not doing enough. I said, oh boy. Okay, the next day, federal order. You don't think that was already drafted, you're out of your mind. Okay, they had to wait for it to be asked for. This is an election year. Okay, we're talking about putting some high demands on rural America. So they have this thing about you can't transport diseased cattle with all these little ifs, ands, or buts about it. You have to have a positive sample. I think we can all have flashbacks to COVID on how well that worked. And yeah, they weren't positive 10 days ago, but they're probably positive now. And they're in a truck going across the country through your town on the way to its destination. And by the way, those trucks that haul cattle, they're washed out at things called cattle truck washes. And where are those located? On the edge of town. Sometimes they just have impoundments in the back. Sometimes they discharge a sanitary sewer system. So they go to your wastewater treatment plant, like in Woodward, Oklahoma. I used to regulate and write permits for cattle truck washes. They do not disinfect for avian influenza, okay? They just use high-powered wash to get rid of the poop and send the guy down the road. Now, some of the poultry facilities, they have some pretty onerous written biosecurity on how to disinfect the cattle trucks. That when I went and looked at all the things that would go about it, it's really, it looks great on paper, but the implementation is very difficult. When you think it just takes a couple of virus to find a host to duplicate, because this is microbiology. Okay, these are growing things. All right. So consider this. What is so special about dairy cattle exposure that ensures that beef cattle would not also be susceptible to HPAI? Okay, so this is from a presentation I did 2 or 3 weeks ago. Yesterday, the USDA proudly said that they had sampled 30 samples of ground beef and did not find any HPAI. Thank the Lord for small favors. But then if you looked at what they sampled, if you don't look in the right place, you're not going to find it, okay? When HPAI gets in mammals, where they find it is in the brain, okay? Think about that. So how many dairy herds are infected with HPAI that also had a large poultry operation nearby that also was infected by HPAI? You would be shocked to find out both Texas and Kansas and Michigan and Idaho had similar things that happened at the same time. Surely totally coincidental. Okay, who is ensuring that the farm workers are provided training and timely health and safety information in their native language? Okay. Yeah. Who is training and informing the truckers and workers that are collecting the raw milk, transporting it, dropping it off at the milk processing plant, the ice cream plant, the cheese plant, et cetera? Who's training them when it splashes in their eyes and this, that, and the other? And when the young people are washing down the tanker trucks in between, who's telling them what they're being exposed to? No word on that yet. How many total dairy cows? This is when I talk about, oh, it's just 10%. You know, what it's so funny, in my whole career, the industry always finds a number that they think is small, okay? And then they give you that number. Like, oh, well, it's only 1 parts per million, but the standard's in parts per billion. So it's 1,000 parts per billion, but they don't want to tell you that. See, no, they find a number. So 10%, okay, we can't tell them it's 200 cows. We'll just say it's 10. It's hardly nothing. Don't worry about it. But we know that there are dairies in Wisconsin and Michigan that are 8,000 head. And they're down the street from another one that's 8,000 head. Okay, Kennard, Central Sands, all of these dairies that I worked on years ago, they're all susceptible. They're in the flight path if it's truly just wild birds. Okay, maybe in the one time it was, but now we have had HPAI in poultry facilities for several years in the United States. What goes in between these facilities? Vets, feed, all kinds of delivery, okay? There's other ways to spread this infection than just those sweet little geese flying over our heads. Now, what are we going to do about, oh, and another article I read, just like with COVID, guess what? CDC says, well, the farmers aren't going to let us voluntarily come on site and take samples. So they go to the wastewater treatment plant, like they did with COVID, and they look for the virus there. Because if we have it, down it goes, right? They're in Amarillo, they found increased levels of influenza in the wastewater treatment plants. Now, that's where it stopped, the information. We don't know if it's HPAI.
Now, they just didn't want to freak everybody out.
Yeah, because we just come from COVID, but we're all tough. We can handle it. We just can't. So anyway, what I'm going to say, these are some good resources. CIDRAP is the best for up-to-date information. It's through the University of Minnesota. They have really almost timely hourly updates. The USDA, CDC, WHO, et cetera, they're going to have only the confirmed information, and it's going to go through a lot more lawyer filters before it gets online. And yeah, I just want to reemphasize that there was a lot of beef cattle just a stone's throw from some of these places. And the samples that they took were in ground beef in retail stores in states where there were infected cows. Now they did that with milk. They did 158 samples, of which 1 in 5 were positive for HPAI virus, okay? Then they took, but it's a PCR, so it only says whether the virus is there. They don't, not whether it's viable or not. So then they have further study and they said, oh, they're all non-viable. Now, I don't know about you, but 158 samples to represent the national inventory of milk, cheese, sour cream, cottage cheese, yogurt, that goes to school systems, that goes to institutional kitchens, that goes to the fabrication of other types of foods, that 158 samples is not even scratching the scratch. 10,000, 30,000 samples. We got to get serious about how long this influenza has been in the dairy industry. Because like I said, the only thing is a drop in milk, they sell the cow. So we just had an article come out this week. They suspect that the influenza has been in dairy at least since last year in order to have had so much milk test positive for it. Because 33 cows is not going to infect the milk supply, but 10% of 33 herds for 3 or 4 months, well. And the other thing is, when you go to look at the milking system, when they go to the milk processing system, they do disinfect for things like listeria and other known pathogens in milk. And they use either hydrogen peroxide, bleach, or ammonia. And it's, oh, that'll be fine for avian influenza, although we haven't tested it yet, okay? So there's always a lot of don't panic. And I say, yes, do panic, but in a smart way, okay? Just be in a smart way. Wash your hands way more times in the kitchen. Don't drink any raw milk at all right now until things get sorted out. Thank you.
So our next speaker is Kelly Foster, who's the attorney for Waterkeeper Alliance that works on CAFO's manure. And she just did an incredible report, which you can access online for Toledo or on Lake Erie Waterkeeper on processing plants. US EPA came out some months ago and basically said that meat and dairy processing plants were the largest nutrient dischargers, industrial dischargers.
Am I ready to go?
There's Kelly. So Kelly's gonna do this virtually from Oklahoma. She also is. Or are you not in Oklahoma anymore?
I'm
You're-
not. I'm in Missouri.
Okay. So she's done a lot of the litigation. She did the Oklahoma litigation in the Attorney General's office on a Tyson case. She's an amazing attorney in person and a friend. And Kelly, you want to talk about processing plants in Erie and in general across the country?
Yes. Okay. So bear with me as I share my screen. I might not pull this off seamlessly, but I did want to say that Kathy Martin is one of the first people I ever worked with on CAFO issues in Oklahoma in 1997. And if we had time, it would be the most amusing CAFO story of a CAFO case you've ever heard. But I have a great deal of admiration for her expertise and work. And she is one of the people I credit with educating me about the legal and technical issues associated with CAFOs. Historically, as I've worked on CAFOs, I've tended to focus just on the CAFO. But over the years, I've come to learn that to understand that what we're dealing with the animal agriculture industry is far more complex. And there are many different aspects to the industry that are all interrelated and have cumulative effects on the environment. One aspect of that are slaughterhouses and rendering plants, which is what I'm going to cover today, hopefully. I told you it wouldn't be seamless. Okay.
Thank you, Alexis. Perfect.
Is it working?
Yes.
Okay. So this is the picture of a slaughterhouse in Alabama. Waterkeepers across the country are dealing with pollution from slaughterhouses and rendering plants. And I'm going to kind of go over an overview. And then as Sandy mentioned, we did a really in-depth look at the watershed boundaries that Lake Erie Waterkeeper protects to evaluate some of the facilities and illustrate the need for better national effluent limitation guidelines under the Clean Water Act. So this industry on average slaughters about 17,000 animals per minute across the country. In addition to the waste that they produce in their wastewater, they're producing byproducts like fat and bone and feathers that are sent off to rendering plants for conversion into tallow and animal meal and other products. Slaughterhouses and rendering plants both require a near constant flow of water, and they discharge hundreds of millions of pounds of water pollution into surface waters across the country each year. They are major contributors to the national nutrient pollution crisis that is rendering water unsafe for drinking and outdoor recreation and aquatic life and many other things. According to EPA, nutrient pollution is the most widespread and costly environmental challenge that we have. That's true in most places in the country. But despite that, we have these readily identifiable industrial point sources of pollution that EPA just hasn't addressed with protective water pollution standards. The technology exists to be able to treat nitrogen and phosphorus and other pollutants from these facilities, but they're just not being required to apply it and meet protective standards. About 60 million people live near rivers and streams that are polluted by slaughterhouses and rendering plants. And EPA made a determination recently that these facilities are disproportionately harming under-resourced communities, low-income communities, and communities of color. So here's a map that EPA produced, and I have it up here because I want to give a sense of the nature of this industry. So there's about 5,055 roughly slaughterhouses and rendering plants in the country. Most of them are indirect discharging facilities, which are shown on this map from EPA in blue. And the others are direct discharging facilities. That accounts for about 3,879 of the total slaughterhouses across the country. The remaining facilities, which are not even shown on this map, which amount to more than 1,000 facilities, are classified by EPA in the states as non-discharging. That may sound familiar to you if you understand CAFO stuff. They're called non-discharging because typically they're land applying the waste, which also results in a discharge. But those facilities are either completely unregulated or subject to permits, which are often not protective of water quality and not adequate to prevent discharges to waterways. So slaughterhouses and rendering plants are the #1 and #2 industrial sources of phosphorus and nitrogen, respectively, in the country. And that is because EPA has not established protective effluent limitation guidelines and pretreatment standards for these facilities. The Clean Water Act requires EPA to do that. They're supposed to set water pollution standards and review those standards every year to make sure that industries are keeping pace with technology. And that's not happening here. EPA failed to revise standards for slaughterhouses and rendering plants for the last 19 years. The standards that do exist are out of date, non-existent, or poorly enforced. None of the existing regulations limit phosphorus discharges. So there's no standards, no technology-based requirement that results in limitations on phosphorus in EPA's national standards. Even more concerning than that, and that's plenty concerning, is the fact that EPA has never published national standards that are applicable to those blue dots on this map. No standards. Those are the indirect discharging facilities that are discharging into wastewater treatment systems that don't have any national pretreatment standards to control the amount of pollution they're releasing into those systems. And as a result, that pollution overwhelms a lot of wastewater treatment plants, and the pollution passes through directly untreated into water bodies. Due to the lack of pretreatment standards, EPA did a survey of wastewater treatment plants as part of a recent rulemaking, which is mentioned here, and found that 73% of the treatment plants they looked at had Clean Water Act permit violations associated with the pollutants that are contributed by these types of facilities. So in response to some litigation that several people were involved in, including Waterkeeper Alliance, EPA entered into a consent decree and agreed to adopt updated standards for the industry. And that's summarized briefly here. The rulemaking comment process is already closed. It closed in March. We did extensive detailed technical comments on them, asking for improvements upon even the most protective option, which is called option 3 here. But I want to summarize a little bit about what EPA has proposed. So right now, as I mentioned, only about 3% of slaughterhouses nationwide have standards, and those are outdated, and the vast majority of facilities aren't subject to any standards. Here, EPA proposed several different options, and their preferred option was option 1, which you can see from this chart is wholly inadequate to address the problem. It only addresses 125 direct dischargers and 719 indirect dischargers. But for those indirect dischargers, those 719, there's still no limits on nitrogen and phosphorus. It's the conventional pollutants that end up getting standards, pretreatment standards. So clearly not adequate to address the problem, but they selected it. One of the primary reasons that they said they were selecting it was because the administration had a goal to expand processing capacity. Those two goals are not mutually exclusive. We need to actually have environmental protections as we're expanding independent processing capacity, and it's totally achievable, as EPA's analysis demonstrated in this rulemaking. So option 3 is better. Option 3 is in the rule. And as I said, we advocated for that to even be strengthened, but as proposed by EPA, it would cover more direct dischargers, 133, leaving the smaller processors outside of the ELGs. And it would bring in a lot of the significant medium and large indirect discharging processing plants, about 1,485 of those. And you can see from that second table there that that results in major reductions in nitrogen and phosphorus loadings across the country. So 83% reduction, or 76 million pounds per year of nitrogen, and 94% reduction for phosphorus, which is about 20 million pounds per year of phosphorus. So let's talk about Lake Erie, and I know I'm probably going to run out of time, so I should probably go faster. So we wanted to take a look at what this rule and what the various options would mean for Lake Erie. And what we saw was, based on information produced by EPA, most of the facilities in this basin are indirect discharging facilities. And so EPA calls this category of slaughterhouses and rendering plants in the effluent limitation guidelines program the meat and poultry processing category. So I'm going to start referring to them as MPP facilities, and I just wanted to clarify that. It is clear that these MPP facilities in the Lake Erie Basin are significant sources of pollution, and particularly nitrogen and phosphorus pollution, but they are largely unmentioned in regulatory documents, largely ignored. In part, I don't know if it's fair to say ignored, but unmentioned. I'll say that, because that is true. EPA has identified about 85 potential MPP facilities in this boundary that we have here on the map. And as I said, most of them are going to be non-discharging. Due to the nature of these non-discharging facilities and how they're regulated under the Clean Water Act, access to information about what they're discharging, what they're producing is really hard to come by. And I'll explain a little bit about how they're regulated and what that ends up looking like in terms of environmental impact. But we do know, because EPA has failed to adopt pretreatment standards for these indirect discharging facilities, They are known to be significant contributors of pollutants and to impose significant economic and environmental burdens on communities and the wastewater treatment plants that are dealing with their waste. So in Ohio, for example, many municipalities have been approved to implement the Clean Water Act's pretreatment program. That essentially puts them in the role of the regulator, and they issue permits directly to their industrial dischargers. However, permitting and monitoring records are really hard to come by, and they're not available on sites like EPA's ECHO database or the Ohio EPA online information. But there is one example that I wanted to talk about where we could locate records, which is in Delphos, Ohio. And that example really tangibly demonstrates how problematic it is that there are no pretreatment standards available. So this municipal wastewater treatment system in Delphos serves a human population of about 7,000 people, and it's in the Western Lake Erie Basin. It has an average design flow of about 3.8 million gallons per day, and it discharges effluent into Jennings Creek, which is a tributary to the Auglaize River, which in turn flows into the Maumee River and is a major tributary of Lake Erie. The NPDES permit, the Clean Water Act permit for Delphos, does not have any limits on total Keldol nitrogen, nitrate, nitrite, metals, or chloride. Those are pollutants that come with MPP facilities. And it's authorized to discharge a significant amount of total phosphorus with a weekly loading of 22 kilograms per day and a weekly concentration of 1.5 milligrams per liter. There are at least 3 potential MPP facilities in Delphos, but one of those facilities is a significant industrial user permitted under Delphos's pre-treatment program, and it's called Lakeview Farms. According to the city, high organic loading attributing to food processing flows in from these 3 industries located in Delphos, and it results in a waste equivalent of more than 50,000 people. Remember, Delphos has a human population of 7,000 people. And it generated the need for a facility in the town that can handle wastewater loading from a population equivalent of over 70,000 people. Lakeview Farms is the source of the majority of that flow to Delphos's wastewater treatment lift station, which is called the Ricker Street Lift Station. And that is the lift station that handles most of the industrial waste for the town. The town has experienced multiple problems, including solids buildup and hydraulic problems that have caused the facility to not be able to function at its original design capacity and to violate the effluent limits in its NPDES permit, resulting in the town and its citizens having to incur costs associated with expensive treatment plant upgrades. According to EPA's online compliance database, those effluent limit violations are continuing with permit limit exceedances in 11 of the 12 last quarters for one or more of the following parameters: biological oxygen demand, E. coli, ammonia, dissolved oxygen, total phosphorus, and toxicity. Despite this reality, in August of 2023, it was reported in the paper that Lakeview Farms is asking Delphos to provide additional sewer capacity and infrastructure, which requires additional funding from the town to support the company's $24 to $35 million plant expansion and to create an express sewer for a new treatment plant, for a new plant that is going to be constructed there. So taking a look at the EPA data for this particular facility, I think I should have advanced the slides. It's kind of lifted there and it's probably pretty tiny, so you can't see it, but there's a significant amount of pollution being discharged into the Jennings Creek, the receiving water there, including, just for example, about 24,206 pounds per year of total nitrogen in 2023, and BOD of 435,000 pounds per year in 2023. And you can see, total dissolved solid loadings in the millions on this chart. So that's just one example. It's important. It doesn't always come across. It's important to understand the pressures that come on towns when you have a major industry that's an important economic engine and you've agreed to take on their waste and treat it, but then you struggle with your treatment plant being able to handle it. When you're also in the shoes of being the regulator that's supposed to tell your major industry what limits it should have on it, a lot of times that isn't happening. And it has a problem that rolls downhill in that the city has a less protective than necessary permit because it can't meet protective limits because it didn't put the pre-treatment standards that it needed to have on its major industrial discharger. I hope that was clear and made sense. That's why we need EPA to do what it's required to do and establish these national pre-treatment standards. So that removes that particular problem and could result in significant improvements. Here's another example that I wanted to cover. This is one where the state of Ohio retains jurisdiction to do the permitting for the MPP facility. This is North Baltimore. It serves a village of about 4,200 people in Southern Woods County. It has an average design flow of 0.8 million gallons per day and discharges into Rocky Ford Creek. Rocky Ford Creek is impaired by pathogens and sediment. It flows into the Portage River, which is a tributary, which is a priority watershed for phosphorus reductions under the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, and it's a major tributary to Lake Erie. North Baltimore has at least one MPP facility, National Beef, that is regulated under a significant user program. The pretreatment for that facility, National Beef, has no concentration limits on its discharge into the wastewater treatment system and no loading limits for any pollutant. It just has a limit on pH. That's a significant problem for a small facility, a small wastewater treatment plant. As a result, there are no limits in National Beef's permit on things like total suspended solids, phosphorus, oil and grease, CBOD, nitrogen or nitrogen compounds, ammonia, metals, chlorides, pathogens, all of the things which are typically present in slaughterhouse and rendering plant waste. Not surprisingly then, the NPDES permit for North Baltimore wastewater treatment plant also lacks concentration and load limits on pollutants that are associated with MPP facilities like TKN, total nitrogen, nitrate, nitrite, phosphorus, most metals and chlorides. That's an illustration of the problem I'm talking about, where you have a major industry and a town that can't handle the waste. What happens is all that pollution can just pass through untreated and uncontrolled into receiving waters. According to ECHO, the EPA's database of information, the wastewater treatment plant reports significant loadings of multiple pollutants to Rocky Ford Creek, including 20,939 pounds per year of nitrogen in 2023, and multiple other pollutants that are shown there on that chart. So I have two other things I want to cover. I'll try to go quickly. But stop me if I need to stop, okay? So I also want to talk about a couple of direct dischargers. There aren't as many direct discharging facilities, but there are issues with the permits and the compliance with multiple direct dischargers. So let's talk about this one. GA Windsor and Sons Company is a rendering and byproduct processing facility. Oh, wow. I don't know if I can say the name of this town correctly. Wapakoneta, Ohio. I'm not going to try. The facility discharges effluent to Pashita Creek and an unnamed tributary to that creek, which is impaired by pathogens. That creek is a tributary to the Auglaize River. And the Auglaize River below where that creek flows in is subject to an EPA approved TMDL for ammonia, phosphorus, pathogens, and sediments. However, the NPDES permit for this particular facility authorizes the facility to discharge total nitrogen from 3 outfalls, each with a design flow of 0.25 million gallons per day, and at a very high concentration of 194 milligrams per liter and a high load of 184 kilograms per day. That permit does not contain any limits at all on total phosphorus, TKN, nitrate, chlorides, metals, and other pollutants that are associated with MPP facilities. In addition to the lack of adequately protective NPDES limits, this facility has been identified as being in significant non-compliance with its NPDES for 7 of the last 13 quarters. And in just normal violation, I guess, not deemed significant by EPA for 4 of the others. So together, about 11 of the last 13 quarters, there have been violations. So you can see here also, according to ECHO, they're contributing significant loads to the water of multiple pollutants, including really high levels of total dissolved solids, significant amounts of phosphorus, and significant amounts of nitrogen. And then the last one that I wanted to cover is the Campbell Soup Supply Company, which is located on the banks of the Maumee River. It discharges effluent into the river and unnamed tributaries of the river, which, as you probably know, is impaired for algal growth, nutrients, and pathogens. The NPDES permit for this facility has some interim limits that are going to be in place for 36 months after spring of 2022. That permit does not contain concentration or loading limits on ammonia in during the winter, TKN, nitrate, nitrite, total nitrogen, chlorides, or many metals, with the exception of a single outfall that's associated with can making. And for outfall 1, a major outfall, it allows Campbell to discharge high concentrations at 1.5 milligrams per liter maximum and loading of 56.8 kilograms per day of total phosphorus into the Maumee River. In addition to the lack of adequately protective effluent limits in the permit here, according to ECHO, this facility has been identified as being in significant non-compliance with its NPDES permit for a wide range of parameters in 12 of 13 quarters, in violation of its NPDES permit for the majority of the most recent of those quarters. According to ECHO, shown on this chart, Campbell is contributing very significant loads of multiple pollutants into the Maumee River, including ammonia and BOD, nitrogen at 36,570 pounds per year in 2023, 18,756 pounds per year of phosphorus in 2023, and 9,093,590 pounds per year of total dissolved solids. So I wanted to give those examples to illustrate why we need EPA to do a better job and adopt these more protective standards. It is not happening through local limits or state limits that are being imposed into these permits. And they are significant contributors of pollution, which are often overlooked in things like permitting for some, and definitely total maximum daily load analysis. Thank you. I can't hear anything.
There we go. No.
Okay. Lake Erie Waterkeeper has sued Campbell for violations over the past 5 or 10 years. And because Ohio EPA has failed to do anything, and actually US Department of Justice has joined us in that lawsuit. But it's in your packet, you'll see that in 2021, the Environmental Law and Policy Center did a blog telling about the significant volume from Campbell and what was going on. And yet for 3 years, Ohio EPA chose to ignore it. And I think that's significant in that if you remember the city of Maumee and the overflows, the sewage overflows, there was significant publicity and the Farm Bureau came out and said how awful it was. I can assure you that the volume coming out of Campbell and the pollution to the Maumee is far more than Maumee. And yet Ohio EPA refused to do anything. So we're in court over that now. There's settlement negotiations and the US Department of Justice has joined us. So on the avian flu dairy or on the processing plants, also just on this one, a link to this report is currently on our website. So if you're interested in the details of the processing plants and what was filed, please go to our website and you'll find it.